Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever or whenever you are. I want to start today's conversation with a question. Not one of those questions that needs an immediate answer. In fact, I'd encourage you not to answer right away. Just let it sit there for a minute. What if nothing is wrong? And I know some of you are already rolling your eyes. Some of you are thinking, well, that's easy for you to say. Maybe your life feels messy right now. Maybe you're dealing with a difficult relationship, or money is tight, or you're worried about your health. Maybe you're carrying grief or stress or so many things that the idea nothing is wrong sounds completely disconnected from reality. Trust me, I get it. I'm not saying life is perfect. I'm not saying challenges aren't real. I'm not even saying there aren't things in your life that deserve attention. What I'm asking is something different. What if the thing that needs fixing isn't you? What if we've become so accustomed to seeing ourselves as projects that we've forgotten how to simply be people? Today's episode is What If Nothing Is Wrong? The exhausting habit of fixing yourself.
Welcome to Aligned AF, real talk for evolving souls with Yahweh Kent. Join Yahweh for honest conversations on spiritual growth, the messiness of life, and how to do it all at a higher frequency. So grab a cup of tea and let's sail in. This is Aligned AF, and here's Yahweh.
Welcome back to Aligned AF, real talk for the evolving soul, and I am Yahweh. So glad to have you with me for this episode, and I'm going to jump right in. I really want to dig into this because I've noticed something over the past few years. The more conversations I have with people, the more books I read, the more spiritual communities I spend time around, the more I see the same pattern. Everybody seems to think they're behind or they should be further along. They seem to think they've missed something. It's almost like we're walking around carrying some invisible story, a story that says, you'd be okay if you could just fix this one thing. The funny part is that one thing keeps changing. You fix your finances, and suddenly it's your relationship. You work on relationship, and suddenly it's your confidence. You work on your confidence, and suddenly it's your purpose. You work on your purpose, and suddenly it's your spirituality. It's like playing spiritual whack-a-mole. Every time one thing settles down, another thing pops up. And after a while, I started wondering whether some of us have become addicted to fixing ourselves. Not intentionally, not because we're doing something wrong, but because we've become convinced that somewhere out there is a version of ourselves that's finally going to be enough. A version that has it all figured out, that doesn't stress, doesn't doubt, that doesn't get a version that doesn't occasionally eat half a bag of chips while wondering why they're eating half a bag of chips. You know, that mythical creature. And maybe you've met them. Or maybe, like me, you've been chasing them for years. There have been so many moments in my life when I thought I was one breakthrough away, one lesson away, one realization away, one healing away. And every time I got there, something interesting happened. Life kept being life. I was still me. The dishes still needed to be done. The bills still showed up. The dog still needed attention. The world didn't suddenly stop spinning because I had a spiritual insight. And at first that felt frustrating because part of me thought growth was supposed to feel like arriving at something, like reaching some destination, like finally crossing a finish line. But the older I get, the more I think that's one of the biggest misunderstandings we carry. There is no finish line. There isn't a day when somebody hands you a certificate that says, "Congratulations, you're now fully healed, fully enlightened, and permanently free from being human." Could you imagine? But it doesn't exist. Life keeps unfolding. And maybe that's the point. Maybe growth was never supposed to make us perfect. Maybe growth was supposed to make us more present, more aware, more honest, more compassionate. And not just with other people, with ourselves. And that's where this gets interesting, because somewhere along the way, a lot of us learned that our value was connected to our improvement. Maybe not directly. Maybe nobody sat us down and said, "You're only worthy if you become better." But we picked up that message anyway. We picked it up in school, in our families. We picked it up through comparison, through achievement, through culture. We learned that being more was good, being better was good, being successful and productive and impressive was good. And before we knew it, we started treating ourselves like resumes. Everything became about becoming more, more accomplished, more spiritual, more successful, more whatever. Now, look, I'm not against improvement. If you've listened to this podcast for any length of time, you know that. I'm a believer in growth. I think growth is one of the reasons we're here. Growth and self-rejection are not the same thing. And I think sometimes we confuse them. Growth says, "I love myself enough to keep expanding." Self-rejection says, "I will love myself once I finally get there." Those are very different energies. One feels light, the other feels heavy. One feels like curiosity, the other feels like judgment. And if you've ever found yourself exhausted from your own personal growth journey, maybe that's worth paying attention to. Maybe you're not tired from growing. Maybe you're tired from carrying the belief that you aren't enough yet. That thought hit me pretty hard when I first realized it, because I could suddenly see how often I'd done it. I'd accomplish something and immediately move the goalpost, learn something and immediately focus on what I still don't know. I'd overcome something and immediately focus on the next thing to overcome. And I never stopped long enough to appreciate where I was. Maybe you've done that too. Maybe you've climbed mountains and only noticed the next mountain in the distance. Maybe you've survived things that once felt impossible and barely gave yourself credit for it. Maybe you've spent so much time becoming that you've forgotten to acknowledge who you've already become. And if that's true, I think it leads us to a deeper question. Not what needs fixing or what needs healing or what needs improving, but where did we learn that we need fixing in the first place? Because I don't think any of us were born believing we were broken. Somewhere along the way, we learned it. And once we learned it, we started looking for evidence to support it. You see, that's what the mind does. It looks for proof. If you believe you're not enough, you'll find proof. If you believe you're behind, you'll find proof. If you believe everybody else has figured it out, you'll find proof. The mind is incredibly talented at supporting whatever story it's been handed. The problem is that not every story is true. And I think that's where we're going to pick up next, because if we've learned broken, the next question becomes, who taught us that story? And more importantly, do we still need to believe it? The older I get, the more convinced I become that most of us aren't carrying our own opinions about ourselves. We're carrying inherited ones, opinions we picked up somewhere along the way. Stories we never consciously chose, beliefs we accepted before we were old enough to question them. And that's not anybody's fault, that's just part of being human. Nobody arrives here with a complete instruction manual. We're all learning from the people around us. We're learning from our parents, our teachers, our friends, our culture, our successes, and our failures. We're constantly collecting information about who we think we're supposed to be. And the problem is that some of that information just isn't true. Or maybe it was true for a while, but it isn't true anymore. You know what's interesting? I've met incredibly successful people who feel like failures. I've met beautiful people who feel unattractive. I've met brilliant people who think they're not smart enough. And I've met deeply spiritual people who secretly believe they're not evolving fast enough. And every time I encounter that, I'm reminded of something. The issue usually isn't reality. The issue is the story, the lens, the interpretation. Two people can have nearly identical experiences and walk away with completely different conclusions. One person experiences rejection and concludes that wasn't the right fit. Another person experiences rejection and they conclude there must be something wrong with me. Same event, different story. And those stories matter because eventually they become the foundation we build our lives upon. I remember years ago hearing someone say that we see the world as it is. We see it as we are. Now, at the time, I thought that sounded profound. Then life spent the next 30 years proving it to me. Because once you start looking, you realize how often we're not responding to reality. We're responding to our interpretation of reality. Responding to old wounds, old fears, old conclusions, old assumptions. And if we're not careful, those assumptions become invisible. We stop questioning them. We simply accept them as facts. One of the assumptions many people carry is the idea that worthiness must be earned. Think about how deeply that belief runs. We see it everywhere. Work harder, do more, achieve more, become more, prove yourself, earn your place, earn your success, earn your happiness, earn your peace, earn your love. And eventually we start treating our own worth the same way. We put conditions on it. I'll be enough when I ... There it is again. That phrase shows up everywhere. I'll be enough when I lose weight. I'll be enough when I write the book. I'll be enough when I launch the business. I'll be enough when I find the relationship that I want. The problem is that when keeps moving. You ever notice that? The mind is incredibly creative. Give it one condition and it'll create another. Meet that condition and it'll create three more. It's like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. No matter how much you pour in, it never feels complete. And I think that's why so many people feel exhausted. Not because they're lazy or they're failing, but because they're chasing an ever-changing definition of enough. And that's a race that nobody wins. I started noticing this in spiritual circles years ago. The language changes, but the pattern stays the same. Instead of trying to be successful enough, people start trying to be enlightened enough. Instead of trying to be productive enough, they start trying to be high vibration enough. Instead of trying to become the perfect employee, they try to become the perfect spiritual soul. Same game, different jersey. And before anybody gets upset with me, I've done this too. I absolutely have this. I've judged myself for having a bad day. I've wondered why I wasn't handling something better. I thought, shouldn't I be past this by now? Maybe you've had those moments too. You think you've learned a lesson, then life brings it back around. A familiar fear, a trigger, insecurity. And suddenly you're frustrated. You think you've somehow gone backwards. But maybe that's not what's happening. Maybe life isn't testing you. Maybe life is simply giving you another opportunity to practice. Because there's a difference between understanding a lesson and embodying a lesson. I understand that patience is important. That doesn't mean I'm always patient. I understand that fear is part of growth. That doesn't stop me from feeling fear. I understand that self-love matters, but that doesn't mean I never criticize myself. Understanding something intellectually and living it consistently are two very different things. And I think we need to give ourselves a little grace around that. Because somewhere along the way, many of us turned growth into a performance. We started grading ourselves, evaluating ourselves, and scoring ourselves. And honestly, I don't think life works that way. I don't think we're here collecting gold stars. I don't think we're here competing against one another. And I certainly don't think we're here trying to become flawless. I think we're here to experience, to learn, to expand, to remember, to forget, fall down, get back up, to laugh, to cry, to love, to lose, to be human. And that's something that took me a very long time to understand. Maybe the reason acceptance feels so difficult isn't because acceptance is hard. Maybe acceptance feels difficult because we've spent years believing that acceptance means stopping. That if we accept ourselves, we'll somehow stop growing. That if we stop criticizing ourselves, we'll lose motivation. Stop pushing ourselves, we'll become complacent. Leave that. I really did. But experience has taught me something different. The people who grow the healthiest are usually the people who hate themselves into growth. They're the people who love themselves enough to grow. And those are very different paths. One is driven by fear, the other is driven by compassion. One feels like punishment, the other feels like expansion. And that realization changed the way I think about acceptance entirely. Because acceptance isn't surrendering your growth. Acceptance is finally ending the war within yourself. And once that war begins to end, something interesting starts to happen. You stop seeing yourself as a problem to solve. You stop seeing every emotion as a malfunction. You stop seeing every struggle as evidence that you're broken. And for the first time, you start allowing yourself to simply be where you are. Not forever, just honestly. And that honesty opens a door that many of us spend years avoiding. Because if acceptance becomes possible, then we have to ask ourselves something even bigger. Who would I be if I stopped defining myself by what needed fixing? That's a question I don't think we ask ourselves nearly enough. Who would I be if I stopped defining myself by what needs fixing? Not what would I do, not what goals would I pursue, not what dreams would I chase. Who would I be? Because if we're honest, a lot of us have spent years introducing ourselves through our struggles. Not necessarily out loud, but internally. We know our wounds better than we know our strengths. We know our insecurities better than we know our gifts. We know exactly where we're falling short, but we have a much harder time recognizing where we're already enough. I think that's because we've spent so much time looking at ourselves through the lens of improvement that we've forgotten how to simply see ourselves. I was thinking about this the other day. Imagine meeting someone for the first time. Imagine spending an hour talking with them. You learn about their life, their challenges, their victories, their fears, their hopes, their dreams. And at the end of the conversation, you realize something. This person is doing the best they can. They're trying, they're learning, they're stumbling sometimes, but they're getting back up. They're figuring things out as they go. Most of us would naturally extend compassion to that person. We'd recognize their humanity. We'd see their effort. We'd appreciate their journey. But somehow, when it comes to ourselves, all that compassion disappears. Suddenly, we're not a human being doing our best. We're a problem that needs solving. We're a project that isn't finished. We're a list of flaws that require constant management. That's a difficult way to live, because eventually you stop experiencing your life and you just evaluate it. Everything becomes an assessment. Am I growing enough? Am I healing enough? Am I successful enough? Am I spiritual enough? Am I doing this right? It's exhausting. And the crazy thing is that most of us don't even realize we're doing it anymore. It's become normal. The background noise of our lives, like a radio that's been playing so long, we no longer notice it's there. But every once in a while, if we're lucky, something happens that makes us hear it again. Maybe it's a conversation, maybe it's a loss, maybe it's a major life transition. Maybe it's one of those moments where everything you've been chasing finally arrives and you're still you. Those moments are fascinating because we spend years believing that achievement or relationship or milestone is going to change everything for us. And then it happens. And for a moment, it feels incredible. But eventually, life returns to normal. You're still you. You still have thoughts. You still have doubts. You still have fears. You still have dishes in the sink. The human experience continues. And that's when some people become disappointed. because they realized the thing that they're chasing wasn't actually what they wanted. What they really wanted was permission to be at peace. I think about that a lot. How many of us have attached our peace to a future condition? How many of us have quietly told ourselves, I'll relax when I'll be happy when I'll trust myself when I'll feel enough when dot, dot, dot. It's such a common that we rarely question it. But imagine what happens when your peace is always tied to the next achievement, the next realization, the next breakthrough. You never actually get to experience peace. You only get to chase it. And chasing peace is one of the quickest ways to miss it. Because peace isn't usually hiding in the future. It's usually hiding underneath our resistance to the present. Now, that doesn't mean you stop creating or growing. I've got goals, I've got dreams, I've got things I'm working toward. But there's a difference between moving towards something because it excites you and moving towards something because you believe your worth depends on it. One feels joyful, the other feels desperate. One feels expansive, the other feels heavy. And I think many people spend years carrying that heaviness without realizing it, especially in healing circles and spiritual communities. Because healing itself can quietly become an identity. I talked about this in my last episode, Addicted to Becoming. This one took me a while to see. At first, we began healing because we want freedom. We want to understand ourselves. We want to release pain. We want to become more conscious. And these are all beautiful things. But if we're not careful, healing can slowly shift from being something we do to being who we are. We become the seeker, the wounded one, the person who's always working on themselves, the person who's always processing, always healing, always trying to get to the next level. And before we know it, we've built an entire identity around becoming. And here's the tricky part. The identity feels familiar, even when it's uncomfortable. And human beings tend to hold on to what feels familiar, even when it no longer serves them. That's why people stay in jobs they've outgrown, or relationships they've outgrown, or they hold on to beliefs they've outgrown. Because familiarity feels safe. Healing identities can work the same way. At some point, freedom starts knocking on the door, and freedom asks a terrifying question. Who are you without the struggle? Lessons, not without the wisdom, not without the growth, but without constantly defining yourself through what you've survived. That's a harder question than most people realize, because some of us have carried certain stories for decades. Stories about who we are, stories about what happened to us, stories about why we struggle or what we need to overcome. And those stories become part of our identity. But here's something I've learned. The purpose of healing isn't to become an expert on your wounds. The purpose of healing is to become free enough to stop living inside them. At some point, the cage door opens. At some point, the lesson lands. At some point, the wound no longer needs to be the center of your story. And when that happens, life asks a different question. Not what still needs fixing, but what would you like to create? And that's a completely different conversation, because one question keeps your attention on the past and the other turns your attention toward possibility. And maybe that's where real healing begins. Not when you've removed every scar or solved every problem or finally figured everything out. Maybe real healing begins the moment you stop making your wounds the most interesting thing about you. Because you are more than what hurt you. You're more than what challenged you. You're more than what you survived. Start realizing that, something shifts. You stop asking, what's wrong with me? And you start asking, what's possible for me? And that's a much more interesting question. And that brings me to something I think might be the most important part of this entire conversation. Because if you're not broken, if your worth was never actually in question, if your humanity isn't a flaw, then what exactly have you been chasing all this time? And more importantly, what happens when you stop chasing it? That's one of the biggest surprises in any spiritual journey. Eventually, you realize that what you've been chasing isn't actually what you've been chasing. Stay with me for a second. We're chasing healing or peace or purpose or sickening or abundance. But if we're really honest, most of the time, we're chasing a feeling. We're chasing a feeling we imagine those things will give us. We're chasing relief. We're chasing acceptance. We're chasing freedom and enoughness. We're chasing the moment when we can finally exhale and say, okay, now I'm good. And I think that's why so many people feel disappointed when they reach goals they thought would change everything. Because they discover something unexpected. The goal wasn't carrying the thing they thought it was carrying. The peace wasn't hidden inside the achievement. The worth wasn't hidden inside the accomplishment. The acceptance wasn't hidden inside the breakthrough. Those things were never there. The goal was just the goal. The achievement was just an achievement. The breakthrough was just a breakthrough. The thing we were actually looking for was something we already possessed. We just didn't believe it. And I think that's one of the hardest truths for the mind to accept, because the mind loves a journey. The mind loves a destination. The mind loves a problem to solve. What the mind doesn't love is being told that maybe the thing it's been searching for has been sitting quietly inside of us the whole time. That's not nearly as exciting. There's no dramatic quest. There's no treasure map. There's no secret mountain. There's no hidden cave. There's just you. Here. Now. And for a lot of people, that's almost disappointing. Because if nothing is wrong, if your worth isn't broken, if your humanity isn't a mistake, well, there's nothing left to chase. At least not in the way that we've been chasing it. Now, I'm not saying stop growing. I'm not saying stop learning or stop pursuing your dreams. I hope you pursue your dreams. I hope you write the book and start the business. I hope you launch a podcast. I hope you take a trip, learn the thing, build the relationship, create the life that calls you. but do it because it excites you. Do it because it expresses who you are. Do it because it brings you alive. Not because you're secretly hoping it will finally make you enough. Because that's a burden that no dream was ever meant to carry. No relationship can carry that. Achievement can carry that burden. No spiritual practice or amount of money can carry that burden. Eventually, every external thing will collapse under the weight of trying to provide something it was never designed to provide. Say that. Eventually, every will collapse under the weight of trying to provide something it was never designed to provide. And then we're left with ourselves, which, if I'm being honest, is where the real work begins. Not the work of fixing ourselves, the work of befriending ourselves. That's a different kind of work. It's quieter. It's less dramatic. It's less flashy. Nobody gives you a trophy for it. Nobody applauds it on social media. There's no certification program for becoming your own friend. But I think it might be one of the most important things we ever do. Because once you become your own friend, the conversation changes. You stop speaking to yourself like an enemy. You stop treating every mistake like evidence. You stop treating every setback like a verdict. You stop assuming that every difficult moment in your life means you're failing. And you begin extending yourself the same compassion you naturally offer the people you love. And that changes everything. I think about this a lot. If one of your closest friends came to you and said, "I'm struggling," you probably wouldn't look at them and say, "Wow, I thought you'd be by now." You probably wouldn't tell them they're broken or that they should have figured it all out already. No, you wouldn't. You'd listen. You'd care. You'd encourage them. You'd remind them of their strengths. Remind them of everything that they've already been through and overcome. You'd remind them that one difficult chapter or one difficult day or one difficult event doesn't define the entire story for them. And yet somehow we forget to offer ourselves that same grace. We become the one person we're least compassionate towards. And maybe that's part of what this episode is really about. Maybe it's not about whether anything is wrong. Maybe it's about whether we're willing to stop assuming something is wrong every time life gets difficult. Because difficulty is a part of life. Growth and confusion and uncertainty are all part of life. Nobody escapes those things. Not the spiritual people, not the successful people, not the enlightened people, not the people who seem to have all their shit together. Nobody. The difference isn't whether those experiences show up. The difference is how we interpret them when they do. Do we see them as proof that we're broken? Or do we see them as proof that we're human? That's a very different story. Stories matter. Because the story you're living inside becomes the lens through which you experience everything. Let's do that again. The story you're living in is the lens through which you experience everything. For years, many people live inside a story that says, "I am not enough." And because they believe it, they spend their lives gathering evidence for it. But wrong. And what if it always was? What if the voice that keeps telling you that you're behind, that you're failing, that you're not healed enough, that you're not spiritual enough? What if that voice is simply wrong? Not evil, not malicious, just mistaken. And what if it's been mistaken for years? Imagine how much energy gets released the moment you stop arguing with yourself. Imagine how much freedom becomes available the moment you stop treating yourself like a problem. Imagine how much peace becomes possible the moment you stop trying to earn something that was never missing. Because here's what I know. You have survived every difficult day that brought you here. Not perfectly, not gracefully every time, not without mistakes or tears or fear, but you made it. You learned, you adapted, you grew. And while you were busy trying to become somebody, you became somebody. You became the person sitting here listening to this podcast. The person who has endured, who has learned, who has kept going, who has loved and laughed and cried and lived. And maybe that's the person who deserves a little more appreciation. Not the future version of you, not the perfected version of you, or the enlightened version of you. This version, the one who's here right now. Because the truth is, the person you've been trying so hard to become, the person you've been healing towards and reaching for, might be standing a lot closer than you think. Maybe they've been here all along. Maybe they've been waiting patiently while you searched everywhere else. Maybe they've been waiting for you to stop looking at what's missing long enough to notice what's here. To notice your strength, your resilience, your wisdom, your courage, your humanity. Maybe that's my invitation to you today. Not to stop growing, don't stop dreaming or becoming, but stop treating yourself like you're broken while you're doing it. Because growth rooted in self-rejection will always feel exhausting. Growth rooted in self-acceptance becomes something else entirely. It becomes an adventure. It becomes curiosity. It becomes life. Nothing else away from today's conversation. Take this. You do not have to earn your worth. You do not have to earn your right to belong. You do not have to earn your humanity. You do not have to earn your enoughness. You can grow and still be enough. You can struggle and still be enough. You can be confused and still be enough. You can be learning all the time and still be enough. And you can be a beautifully unfinished human being and still be enough. And maybe, just maybe, nothing is wrong. Thanks for hanging out with me today. And remember, you're getting closer to aligned AF every single day. Well, thanks for hanging out with me today. If this episode spoke to you at all, share it with a friend or someone who needs it. You can also leave a review or connect with me online. You can find Aligned AF on YouTube, Facebook, your favorite podcast channel, or at alignedaf.org. And if you want to reach out directly, you can email me at alignedafpodcast@gmail.com. So until next time, stay aligned AF.